All right, ladies and gentlemen, week 2 of Sunday's NFL slate is going to be kicking off in a couple hours. And if Thursday night's game is any indication of the mix of both pain and excitement that we get from playing fantasy football, and we are for sure in for another week where we need the fantasy gods blessing. So do not skip this video because we are going through every single matchup, going over the best starts in every single matchup, all of the key injuries that are now popping up and quickly ramping up as we approach the week, as well as everything else in between. Here is everything you need to know for week 2 of fantasy football. Let's break it down. Before we do so, let me remind you guys that Underdog is the place you want to be if you want to get in on additional fantasy football action all season long. Their week 2 pick'ems are live. If you guys want to claim a free pick'em, all customers are getting a free CeeDee Lamb over half of a total yard pick'em, and every new Underdog customer, when you use promo code The Catch, is also getting a free Caleb Williams over half of a total yard free pick'em. Promo code The Catch, that link is down below when you guys sign up for the first time on Underdog. And on top of that, you will receive a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 on Underdog. That's up to $1,000 in bonus cash on Underdog, plus those free pick'ems that you can claim with promo code The Catch. Let's break down what we got coming here in week 2 fantasy football. All right, so let's start with the Niners traveling to face the Minnesota Vikings. And of course, we have a key injury here that's going to be Christian McCaffrey is now headed to IR. He's going to miss at least the next 4 weeks. This has obviously caused a wavelength of panic across the fantasy community, but it might just be Jordan Mason's season, and you might just have to accept it if you drafted Christian McCaffrey at the 1.1 or the 1.2 and you left your draft without Jordan Mason. But at the end of the day, C-Mac will probably be back at some point in the season. But for now, here in the short term, let's look at what's going to happen potentially in this matchup between the Niners on the road facing the Vikings. This is still a good run defense. They were a good run defense last year. They were a good run defense in week 1, but it's hard to kind of read into this because they faced Daniel Jones and the New York Giants in week 1, came away with the 4th fewest fantasy points to the running back position. I think Jordan Mason, if you have him, he is a good floor play. The issue comes for a lot of fantasy managers is that you got Jordan Mason as a waiver addition or late in your draft. So you might have literally 3, 4, 5 running backs in front of him who are of good value. I don't necessarily think you have to sell Jordan Mason high coming off of week 1. Plus, if you're watching this and you still own him, probably don't have enough time to do so before Sunday's slate. But you might have enough stud running backs that you don't have to start Jordan Mason today. I still think he is a strong start, but I do think that the Minnesota Vikings run defense at home could limit Jordan Mason's upside. At the same time, this is the Niners offense. I think they could pick up anyone off the street and plug them in at running back and they'd probably have success. So still like Mason, but just look at your roster and who else you have at running back. You might not need to start Jordan Mason today. Debo, Ayuk, I think are both solid going into this matchup. You're probably starting both of those guys anyways, but if you are worried about Brandon Ayuk, he will be better here in this matchup. This is a much weaker secondary than the Jets, and he's not going to get the Sauce Gardner treatment here in week 2. Be interesting to see if Debo, was elevated again in the rushing game with C-Mac out. Could certainly be the case. Kittle, you just got to start Kittle on a week in, week out basis. If you own Kittle, you're probably not overthinking it, right? So don't overthink it. But Purdy, I do think is interesting. Let's not read too much into that week 1 ranking for the Vikings defense. They allowed the fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks in week 1. But they faced Daniel Jones in week 1. So if you own Purdy here on the road, I think you can still start him. I know last week, really low ceiling, just 10.3 fantasy points. But if you own Purdy, you're probably starting him. If you feel like you can afford to bench him, I think that is perfectly fine as Well, moving on to the Vikings, we have a key injury with Jordan Addison out in this game, still dealing with that ankle injury. So, what does that mean for the rest of this offense? Aaron Jones, I think, is a solid start. The Niners' run defense still going to be good, but we still saw Breece Hall walk away in week 1 with a solid fantasy stat line and a touchdown. Is Aaron Jones equivalent to Breece Hall? No, but at the end of the day, I think that Aaron Jones is just one of those guys that you're starting, and he'll just be fine as an RB2 week in, week out. Maybe if the Vikings were on the road, I'd be a little bit more worried here, but at home, I think that they will be okay and Aaron Jones will be okay. JJ, you're just starting Justin Jefferson. We don't need to talk about it, but don't be worried due to the matchup. The Niners actually gave up quite a few points, fantasy points to wide receivers in week 1. Almost all of them to Allen Lazard, but JJ should be fine. I actually quite like him in this matchup. If you're looking for a deep stream, Jalen Naylor is going to be suiting up as the wide receiver 2 for the Vikings today. If you're desperate, if you're in a 16-man league, whatever it is, Jalen Naylor's worth a shot. He's the wide receiver 2 here. And if you're wondering, Sam Darnold's name might not be on the screen, but if you're in a super flex or a double quarterback league, I think you could start Sam Darnold. I'm not going to go out of my way to do so. Last week, the Niners still finished 21st against opposing quarterbacks, so bottom 12 against the position. I don't think Addison's going to do anything crazy. This is a much tougher matchup than week 1. But if you own him in a Superflex double quarterback league, I think you could roll him out there if you absolutely have to. All right, moving along to one of the more gross matchups here in week 2. We've got the Seahawks traveling to face the New England Patriots. Major key injury for the Seahawks. Kenneth Walker is doubtful. By the time this video gets released, he might just be ruled out with that oblique injury. What does that mean really for the Seahawks offense here on the road against a good Patriots defense that showed up against the Bengals in week 1? Well, Geno Smith isn't on the screen here. Geno Smith is limited to just super flex double quarterback formats for me. I know he had 18 fantasy points in week 1, but I don't feel very good about either offense here going into this matchup. This is a stay away game for me. If you have to start Metcalf, sure, fine. He's DK Metcalf. The Patriots played very well against the wide receiver position in week 1. They still allowed a double-digit fantasy performance to Jamar Chase in week 1. So, I think the touchdown upside is huge for Metcalf here in week 2. I think he's fine, though. I don't really want to go out of my way to start Tyler Lockett or JSN. They're fringe borderline flex plays. I maybe Lockett more right now, but I don't even know. Let's get a larger sample size out of that wide receiver room. I think you can stream Zach Charbonnet at the running back position, but I'm not going out of my way to do so. I don't think if you picked up Charbonnet off the waivers, if you're holding him as a handcuff, you don't have to plug Charbs in as a start this week. He is like a fringe borderline start if you're desperate at the RB2 spot. This Patriots run defense came in with the 10th fewest points to running backs in week 1. I just don't feel good. This is a stay away matchup for me. I don't feel good about the Hawks offense. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't feel good about them going into week 2. And on the flip side here, I don't feel good about the Jacoby Brissett led New England Patriots offense. The Seahawks still allow the second fewest points to running backs in week 1. I'm okay with Ramondre. The volume was really good in week 1. He looked very good against the Bengals, had a solid fantasy day. He's really the only Patriots offensive player I would consider starting in this matchup. And once again, he's coming in as an RB2 for a lot of you guys. So if you own Ramondre, he's okay, but I think the ceiling is a little bit lower this week. At least the Patriots are at home if you own Ramondre. I will say if you are in a league that plays with defensive special teams slots, I like both of these teams. They probably have been picked up by this point in the week on the waiver wire. If you're starting either one, I think that's good. If they're out there on the waivers, you need a streaming defense. I think both of them are definitely viable options as we move in to week 2. Right, next up, we got the Giants traveling to face the Washington Commanders. And I do like this game a lot for fantasy purposes. We have 2 bad defenses involved here. I have a bad feeling that there's no in-between in this game, though. The first scenario is both offenses somehow find a way to struggle to move the football, and it's a low-scoring affair. I am a Commanders fan. I have watched the NFC East for a long time, and these things do happen. But I think on the flip side here, we'd see really two bad defensive performances, and both offenses have pretty decent overall days, if not really good days. So I love Malik Neighbors this week. Okay. I forgot to put him on the screen, but I like Randall Robinson as a flex option too, because this Washington Commanders secondary is the worst in the league, and I don't think they're going to get any better as the season goes on, and they were the worst in the league last year as well. So I'm sorry, Randall Robinson, you deserve to be on the screen. He is a good flex, a good last-minute waiver addition, and honestly, in a lot of leagues, he's already been picked up off the waiver wire. But Randall Robinson, if you need a last-minute throw-in flex, I am okay with him on the road against the Commanders. Neighbors, not that bad in week one when we look at things. So I think if like you're nervous about Neighbors, that's fine. And you're probably not nervous about Neighbors or worried about Daniel Jones. But Neighbors still walked away with 11.6 fantasy points in week one, 7 targets, 5 receptions. He did start the week on the injury report. He is not on the injury report. The knee injury not going to be an issue. He's a full go. Keep in mind, Randall Robinson, once again, 12 targets, 6 receptions, 11.8 fantasy points in week one. That is basically in line with what Malik Neighbors walked away with. So if you're confident in Neighbors, I think you should be confident in Robinson too. I think you guys get the message. He's a good flex. Neighbors, a good start. Devin Singletary comes in like that flex category, fringe RB2 area. Just because, once again, this Washington Commanders defense so bad. I'm not going to go out of my way to start Singletary. And in week one, he didn't do much of anything. The game script didn't help him, but just 9.2 fantasy points. But he did have 5 targets, 4 receptions, which is nice to see on top of his 10 carries. So, I don't really like him. But if you have to start him, the matchup is here, right? In terms of the Commanders, Jaden Daniels, we're going to start until further notice. Had an excellent week one. There's no reason to bench him. If he can run all over the place on that Buccaneers defense, who was good against the run last year, I don't know if that's going to be the case this year. Nonetheless, came away with 28 fantasy points and only threw for 184 total yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 88 yards on the ground, QB3 in week one. We're starting Daniels, especially in this matchup. Terry McLaurin, a tough week one. At the end of the day, I think he will bounce back this week strongly against a poor bottom 10 Giants secondary. So if you own Scary Terry, you're worried. Don't be worried. It's almost October, which means it's almost spooky season, which means Terry McLaurin will get better. But the main point here is that the Giants secondary sucks, and we can feel more confident. Tampa Bay actually allowed the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers in week one. That's not going to be the case here at home for McLaurin and company, but there's really no other wide receivers we want to start on Washington's offense. Looking at the running backs here, Brian Robinson Jr. is one of my favorite starts this week. He's a smash play. He's a good flex. He's a good RB2. Double digits, a lock as long as he's healthy throughout this game. Love Brian Robinson this week at home. And yes, I'm not overly excited about Austin Eckler, but if you need to flex him, you're in a bad spot. I think you can. Once again, because we got 2 bad defenses here, we should have a game script that elevates most of the relevant fantasy players in this matchup. And Eckler, I think, will get enough involvement through the air that we can flex him just because it's a bad defense and still feel confident. By the way, if you own a Washington Commanders running back, they will face the Giants this week, then the Bengals, then the Cardinals. They get Carolina in week 7. So hold on to those guys, or especially Brian Robinson Jr. is a fantastic buy opportunity on the trade market. Let's move along. So we have the Chargers traveling to face arguably the worst team in the entire NFL, the Carolina Panthers. And let's start with the Chargers running backs. I want to talk about both of these guys. And let's talk about J.K. Dobbins to start. He is one of my favorite starts in all of fantasy football this week. I'm just not going to ignore this matchup. This Panthers run defense is garbage. It's trash. It was trash last year. There's no reason to not start J.K. Dobbins, who had 13.5 yards per carry, touchdown, 135 yards on the ground, and 3 receptions last week, 22.9 fantasy points in full PPR. You picked him up off the waiver wire. You drafted him, whatever it is. Now, I will say, similar to Jordan Mason, you might have like 3 or 4 studs in front of J.K. Dobbins. Don't be benching, your absolute studs. It makes it really tough. I get it. But the upside with Dobbins, this has been something I've talked about all week long since we started looking at waiver options going into Monday morning. And I still love J.K. Dobbins this week. I really, really do. But don't be benching guys you drafted in the 2nd or 3rd round for a player you got off the waiver wires. At the same time, I really like Dobbins. But let's just take a quick look at the Gus bus as well, because Gus Edwards had 11 touches and 1 target, 1 reception, where Dobbins had 10 touches, 3 targets, 3 receptions. So very close to a 50-50 split overall here. Dobbins was just actually effective on the ground, and Gus Edwards was not. Edwards 2.36 yards per carry, and Dobbins, like I said, 13.5. So I will say, this is still a good enough matchup that if you own Gus Edwards and you have nothing else, I do think Gus Edwards is an okay start streaming option this week. I will say also, the screen is supposed to say flex for Ladd McConkey, stream for Gus Edwards. So I that's messed up. Make fun of me in the comments. But I think both running backs here are solid starts to summarize that position. Ladd McConkey, I do like. Again, we saw 7 targets, 5 receptions, 39 receiving yards, 7.8 yards per catch, and a touchdown, 14.9 fantasy points in week 1. I like Ladd McConkey again in week 2, but I talked about this going into week 1 in terms of Chris Olave. The Panthers somehow were really effective against opposing wide receivers in fantasy last year, and then they found a way in week 1, as bad as they played, to be effective against Chris Olave in week 1. And then really outside of like the big touchdown to Rashid Shaheed, they were still solid against the position all day. They just weren't good against the tight end position, and they were awful against the run. So they're a really weird defense. I still think Ladd McConkey can benefit here because it's just, we don't know if Josh Palmer is going to play. Like, we don't really know. Is Palmer going to line up as a wide receiver 1? Is Ladd McConkey? I don't know. But I still like Ladd. I think he's a low-end flex with good opportunity in this game on the road. But be a little wary. He's down in that flex area just because I don't know how, but the Panthers are good against wide receivers. So Chargers defense, solid start. Going back to the starts here. If they're out there available, you need a last-minute waiver wire addition to stream at defense. Solid start. They're probably not available because everyone's looking at the Panthers and wanting to stream against them. If you own the Chargers defense, keep them in your lineup. Love them this week on the road against the Panthers. In terms of the Panthers, I'm not starting anyone until further notice. I'm staying away. Deontay Johnson's the only player I'd really consider, I think, in most formats. Xavier Leggett, I do want to keep an eye on. I want to keep an eye on Deontay Johnson and Xavier Leggett, and I guess Chuba Hubbard. But I just don't have any confidence in this Panthers offense, at the moment. I hope that things change. I hope that Dave Canales as head coach, something I liked throughout the offseason. I had high hopes and dreams for the Panthers this year, and I already feel like those are crashing. But let's just keep an eye on these two guys, Chuba Hubbard as well, and let's hope Bryce Young is not too awful. But for the most part, I'm not very confident in this Panthers offense as we move into week 2. Moving along, we have the Saints traveling to face the Cowboys. So this is an interesting matchup because we have two defenses that played well in week 1, but we have a lot of guys that you just can't really bench in fantasy football. So yes, I will still start Alvin Kamara. He was like my must-start running back in week 1 because he played the Panthers. 22 fantasy points in week 1 for Kamara, and the game script kind of took him out towards the second half there. But you still got to start Kamara. I mean, still a nice 5 targets in week 1, 5 receptions, so he has that PPR upside, even if he doesn't necessarily find the end zone. I will say, I think both defenses could end up playing well in this game. This is a shaky game for me, but I still think you have to start Chris Olave. I know he was a dud in week 1. We just talked about that. Just 2 targets, 2 receptions, but the game script also didn't help him out. Rashid Shaheed had 5 targets, 3 receptions. Take away that receiving touchdown, not nearly anything done for Shaheed. He finished with 16 fantasy points. So this will be a better game script. Cowboys usually play well at home. Still like Rashid Shaheed as a flex, but I'm getting a lot of comments, a lot of talk about Rashid Shaheed. Like, is he a must start in the flex? All this stuff. I've been on the Rashid Shaheed train for a long time. Okay, I mean, I know this is only his 3rd year in the league, but it's always been my sleeper guy, and I've owned a lot of Rashid Shaheed over the last 2 years, and it's a bumpy ride. There's a lot of volatility. Still like him, but you just got to know what you're putting in the flex. So we'll see what happens here. But I think for the most part, you're going to have to start Kamara. You're going to have to start Olave. And if you want to flex Shaheed, it's okay. All right. Looks like Jake Ferguson is not going to play in this game. He's currently listed as doubtful at the time I'm recording this, which is a bummer. I will say if you're in a very, very bad spot or in a very deep league at the tight end position, I think you could throw Luke Shoemaker out there. It's not the best matchup here against the Saints, but if you're desperate enough, I think you could start Shoemaker and cross your fingers that he scores a touchdown. But Jake Ferguson not going to play in this game is the way things are looking. Dak Prescott's still a start. CeeDee Lamb is still a start. I know Prescott didn't play well in week 1, so maybe you drafted like 2 quarterbacks because he got Dak late. You don't have to start Dak Prescott. He's not a must start, but he is at home. I do expect the Cowboys, like I said, to play better in this matchup at the end of the day. So if you have to roll with Dak, fine, but I do think maybe potentially the ceiling's a little bit low against the Saints. CeeDee Lamb, I mean, I know week 1 wasn't great, but he's still at 13 fantasy points. We're still starting him. He's still at 10 targets is the important thing. Brandon Cooks, I'm okay within the flex. I think this is actually a pretty good matchup. He's still at 7 targets in week 1. And on top of that, Marshawn Lattimore is listed as questionable, so he might not be playing at full health, or he might not be playing at all. He's dealing with a hamstring injury, and that's definitely going to benefit CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks. I mean, I really think either way, but especially if Marshawn Lattimore does not play, and that could really open up things for Lamb and Cooks. Now, Zeke is down in that flex area, that like kind of fringe RB2 area. I mean, maybe we see more out of Rico Dowdle in this game. Maybe we don't. I don't know what to make of this backfield. Dowdle had 8 touches in week 1. Zeke had 10. He had 2 targets, 2 receptions. It's a tough matchup. The Saints allowed basically no fantasy points to the Panthers in week 1. I don't want you to have to start Zeke, but if you need to, I guess. I think this is going to be a really frustrating backfield for fantasy. Don't be surprised if Rico Dowdle scores a touchdown this week and Zeke does not, because it's the Cowboys. I don't know. So I don't want you to start Zeke. It's not a good matchup for either running back. I don't want you to start Dowdle. If you absolutely have to, I guess if I had to flip a coin, I would go with Zeke. So there we go. Saints, Cowboys. Let's move along. So let's take a look at the Colts traveling to face the Packers. This is a good matchup for both sides, I think, actually, but mostly for the Colts. So Colts on the road here. Anthony Richardson, you just got to start. Jonathan Taylor, you also absolutely have to start. The Packers got decimated by Saquon Barkley in week 1. I don't know if it's going to be that intense this week, but it's probably not going to be very good. So JT is an absolute smash, must start. I know he only had 10 fantasy points in week 1. No reason to overthink this. You're starting Jonathan Taylor, no matter, if you have Jonathan Taylor as your RB1 and, like a Rashad White as your RB2, and you also have J.K. Dobbins and Jordan Mason rostered and, I don't know, someone else in there, you're still starting Jonathan Taylor. Don't overthink it. This is a smash play. I love Michael Pittman this week. I think he's going to bounce back from that poor week 1 performance. I mean, we saw Alec Pierce having the game of his life and A.D. Mitchell getting a lot of targets, all of that stuff. Michael Pittman's going to be much better this week. This is a good matchup for Michael Pittman. Like him a lot this week. I think you can still stream the Colts defense on the road here because we're going to get Malik Willis as a starting quarterback. I know Jordan Love technically listed as a doubtful at the time I'm recording this, but come on, Jordan Love's not playing in this matchup. We're getting Malik Willis. Colts bad against the run. Maybe Malik Willis can muster something up here. I will take a chance and stream the Colts defense as bad as they looked in week 1 if you are in need of a last-minute streaming option in a league that plays with defenses. In terms of the Packers, what are we going to do here? Like I said, Malik Willis is starting is what's going to happen. Unless something crazy happens, we get a last-minute announcement that he's not starting. But listen, I think Josh Jacobs, you can still start. The floor is there. He's going to be fine against this bad Colts run defense. At least the Packers are at home. I'm still okay with Josh Jacobs. I don't think you necessarily have to bench Josh Jacobs today. In terms of the Packers wide receivers, I think you can still start Jaden Reed. His ceiling is much, much lower, but I think they're going to find ways to get him the football and get him involved in this game. Someone's going to come out of this game wide receiver-wise with an okay day for sure, and I would take the chance on Jaden Reed. I will say he is questionable at the moment with a calf and shin injury, so keep an eye on that. Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs, maybe Natavion Wicks. I don't think that we have to cross every single guy out here, but I will look at who's the pure wide receiver one for this team going into the week. It's probably Jaden Reed. Who they want to see get the football is probably Jaden Reed. So if he doesn't play because of these injuries he's listed as questionable with, which I don't think look like a major concern, then maybe it's Christian Watson. But I'm okay with Jacobs. I'm okay with whoever the Packers wide receiver one is in the flex. Ceiling's lower here. I think they're going to be okay, even with Jordan Love out. So this is certainly going to be a good and interesting matchup for fantasy football. We'll see what happens. Moving along, we got the Browns traveling to face the Jaguars. David Njoku is not going to play. If you need an absolute last-minute desperation tight end stream, I think Jordan Atkins, who had 4 targets and 3 receptions, 5.7 fantasy points in week 1, is okay. But I'm talking like you are desperate. You just need some sort of points in your lineup, desperate. Also, Deshaun Watson's not injured, but he's really bad at football. What does that mean for the rest of this offense? I think Jerome Ford is a great start. The Jaguars were really weak against the running back position in the Miami Dolphins in week 1. So I really like Jerome Ford. I think he's a solid flex. He's a great RB2 this week. Even on the road here, even with a poor overall offense, I really like I really like Jerome Ford. Looking at the screen, I do not like Deshaun Watson. Do not start Deshaun Watson. Even in super flex formats, I'm out on Watson this week. But yes, Jerome Ford, great start. Amari Cooper, on the other hand, I think will bounce back this week. As much as I'm dogging on Deshaun Watson, I don't think it can get worse than week 1. He threw the ball 45 times and only had 24 completions, 169 yards through the air, 2 picks, 1 passing touchdown, and 39 yards on the ground. So, Cooper's got to be able to bounce back. But I think the more important thing here is Cooper was targeted 9 times, dropped what should have been a touchdown, had just 2 receptions. So the target share was there, the volume was there. So I feel more comfortable with Cooper for that reason. Now, at the same time, Jerry Jeudy had 8 targets and just 3 receptions and came away with a touchdown. So I will say in very, very deep leagues, if you are, once again, absolutely desperate at wide receiver, I'm okay with Jerry Jeudy. Call me crazy, but the matchup's good. At least he walked away with a touchdown last week. But yes, if you own Amari Cooper and you are concerned, I think he is okay to start this week. He will bounce back. Amari Cooper owners, do not panic. All right, looking at the Jaguars, on the other hand, I've gotten a lot of questions about potentially benching Travis Etienne this week. People worried about Tank Bigsby. People just not excited about the Jaguars, the Browns defense, all this stuff. You're still starting Etienne, still scored the touchdown, still got you double-digit fantasy points last week. You just can't really bench a guy like this, And this is a player like maybe I could see where I talked about earlier, like not benching like your second and third round guys for players like Dobbins or Jordan Mason. This is a player I think I could see myself doing that. But I think for the most part, even if the ceiling's a little bit lower, I'm still starting Travis Etienne this week. And I'm not going to panic about Tank Bigsby just yet, but we are certainly watching in this game if Etienne fumbles and how many touches does Tank Bigsby get compared to Etienne in this matchup will be very important. Evan Engram was a dud in week 1, unfortunately. 4 targets, 1 reception. He's still a low-end tight end 1 in week 2. The tight end position was just completely forgettable for the most part in week 1. Engram should bounce back. I'm not going to panic on Evan Engram. He's been a top 5 fantasy tight end 2 years in a row. Let's just start him for the most part, and let's just move along. Now, I am a little concerned about the Jaguars offense. I won't lie. I've been a long time like Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk believer and supporter. And right now, every year I back them up, right? And right now I'm a little nervous. I'm not going to lie. So I'm not calling T-Law like a must start. And I've moved Christian Kirk down to that flex area. And the player I'm more interested in starting is Brian Thomas Jr. But at the same time, it's like you take away the touchdown grab for Thomas in week 1. What exactly are we left with? Not a whole lot. So Kirk, I still think is okay to flex since they're at home and the Browns looked volatile in week 1 and played really bad on the road last year defensively. So Kirk, usually does this at the beginning of the year. You know, he had 1.9 fantasy points in week 1 last year. Not going to go out of my way to flex Kirk, but he's okay. Brian Thomas Jr., more upside, but I still think there's some risk here. He looked very good in week 1, very good. Week 1, rookie performance, caught every single target, 4 targets, 4 receptions, had 14 fantasy points, a touchdown. So I still think he brings nice upside, but still in that flex area for me. So this should be an interesting matchup. We'll see what it brings today in week 2. Moving along, we've got the Aaron Rodgers-led Jets traveling to face the Will Levis-led Titans. So that is a pretty easy one overall. We're starting Breece Hall, and we're starting Garrett Wilson. Now, I will say the Titans' defense in week 1 against the Bears played well. I think part of that was because Caleb Williams played bad, but they allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points to running backs and the 7th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. So you got to start Hall. You got to start Wilson. You just can't. You can't even. This is not a debate, but these are the best starts here. That's mainly what we're going to have on the screen. Now, yes, I want to keep an eye on Allen Lazard. He walked away last week with 2 touchdowns and 26.9 fantasy points and all that stuff. I just don't quite know if it's going to happen on the road here. If it does happen, or if Allen Lazard scores 10 to 14 fantasy points this week, or if he just scores 1 touchdown, then, even in a bad matchup at home, the first Jets home game this year in week 3 against the Patriots, we still got to, at that point, definitely consider Lazard a flex option. He had 9 targets in week 1, where Garrett Wilson had 11. So don't get me wrong, you Allen Lazard truthers out there, those of you who spent half your free agent bidding on Allen Lazard, I'm not raining on your parade today, but I just don't think you have to start. Why would you have to start Allen Lazard? Someone let me know in the comments. You should have enough options. So Jets defense did not play great in week 1. They are a bad run defense. Their secondary didn't play phenomenal either. But I just don't know if Will Levis, my guy, is going to be up for the task here at home. I hope I'm wrong. So if you are planning on starting the Jets defense, you did not start them last week against the Niners, I think this is definitely an okay week to start them. Bringing us to the Titans, I love Tony Pollard this week. I will say, even if you're starting the Jets defense, you're planning on Will Levis turning the football over. I think Tony Pollard is still going to ball out today. He looked great in week 1. He looked like the true RB1 for this team. He got way more rushing volume than Tajay Spears. He was involved in the passing game, scored a touchdown. I love Tony Pollard this week. I think he's a great start at home against the Jets, as well as everyone else. In terms of everyone else on this Titans team, I'm just yeah, I guess you could start Calvin Ridley. I don't want you to. He's probably going to see Sauce Gardner for most of the day. But is D-Hop going to get some of that? I don't know. At the end of the day, the Jets secondary still allowed a fair amount of fantasy points to wide receivers in week 1, most of them to Allen Lazard. But yeah, if you're absolutely desperate, I guess you could start Calvin Ridley. But even then, I don't feel good about it. I don't want to start really anyone other than Tony Pollard for the Titans in this matchup. Let's just move along. That's where I'm at. All right, this will bring us to the Buccaneers traveling to face the Lions. This is probably my overall favorite fantasy matchup for today. I would basically start everyone, okay? Everyone's on the screen. There's not a ton to break down here. Baker Mayfield, I think, is going to have another very strong performance against the Lions. Matthew Stafford looked good against them. I think Baker, who balled out in week 1, which I called, by the way, will look good again in week 2. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, you got to start them. You have to start them, just like last week. 2 of my absolute must-start players in week 1. They are both absolute must-starts here in week 2. This Lions secondary is not good. They also, so far, through week 1, have struggled against wide receivers in the slot. I think Chris Godwin's going to have a massive day, had a massive day in week 1. This Lions defense is good against opposing running backs, but Rachaad White just finds a way to get the football in his hands, whether it's through the passing game, which for the most part it is, or it's through the run game. Keep an eye on Bucky Irving, all you Bucky Irving truthers. Yes, I'm a Rachaad White truther myself, but yes, White is still a very good RB2 in this game. He doesn't have to get it done on the ground, doesn't have to be efficient on the ground or score touchdowns on the ground. He's going to be involved in the passing game, and the game script will be here This is a great game script. It's going to be a really good game overall and a great day for fantasy, or at least for the players involved in this. But Jalen McMillan, I think you could stream. I really think you could if you're desperate enough or if you're in a deeper format. Once again, because this Lions secondary is bad. But we also saw the Bucs try to get Jalen McMillan involved early. Didn't really happen, but then they, in garbage time, got him some reps. He ended up with the touchdown, right? So at the end of the day, like, don't go out of your way to start Jalen McMillan or flex him or anything. This is a complete desperation stream. But I will say, if you want to go and pick him up, stash him. I like Jalen McMillan a lot right now. I'm high on him. And I do think that he could end up having value as the season goes on. He's a player I am watching in this matchup. In terms of the Lions, week in, week out, I mean, you're basically starting everyone here. Yes, I forgot to put Sam Laporta on the screen initially, make fun of me in the comments. But yeah, I mean, Goff, Amon-Ra, J-Mo, Gibbs, Monty, Laporta, there's not much debate here. I will say, I think Goff will have a better week 2 than a week 1. The Buccaneers gave up a lot of fantasy points to Jaden Daniels in week 1, albeit most of that was on the ground. So maybe we'll, I don't know, see a little bit more of a middle ground here as Goff's not going to be running the football. I will say that while the matchup looks bad, this is just kind of like a fluke week 1 thing where the Bucs gave up the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers in week 1, but the Commanders didn't really throw it, and they only had like one wide receiver to throw it to, and then they were just running all over the place with Jaden Daniels and Brian Robinson. So I'm not worried about Amon-Ra, who had a poor week 1. I'm not worried about J-Mo, who is off the injury report, by the way, is going to be a full go, dealing with that ankle injury, but I think the Lions just being cautious throughout the week. So Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I like both of them. Jamison Williams, a player I encourage you guys to start in week 1. I still think he's a solid flex here in week 2. Gibbs, Monty, you just start them. The Bucs did not look good against a run in week 1. And yes, Laporta, you own him. You start him. Not the greatest week 1, but the volume was still there for Laporta. I know the Lions felt a little bit disappointed in week 1. Like Monty, if it wasn't for overtime, would have had a bad fantasy line. Amon-Ra had a bad fantasy line. Goff wasn't at a high ceiling. Not a good fantasy line. And Laporta, not a good fantasy line. So it's really just J-Mo and Gibbs here, but they will be fine. They're still a great offense. Don't worry about these guys. This is one of the matchups I have circled for the week. You're basically starting everyone. Let's move along. All right, moving along, we will have the Raiders traveling to face the Ravens, and this is a pretty easy evaluation here. I mean, you only really have so many fantasy relevant players for the Raiders and a lot for the Ravens. The Ravens allowed a lot of fantasy points to the wide receiver position in week 1. So you got to still roll out Devontae Adams. I like Brock Bowers this week as well. I mean, don't know really what his ceiling looks like, but we saw enough in week 1 for the rookie tight end that we will go ahead and roll him out again because probably don't have anyone better. And the tight end position in week 1 was abysmal. If you own Jacoby Myers, it's like flex option I don't feel good about. If you own Zamir White, let's just sit back and see what happens. The Ravens defense, not great in week 1, but they will have much better days. And I think this is going to be one of them. If you own the Ravens defense and a team or a league that plays with defensive teams, I think they're a great start this week. And one of the reasons why you probably went out and drafted them. Now, in terms of the Ravens, we're just starting everyone. Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews, and Isaiah Likely. Zay Flowers should have had a touchdown grab that Lamar Jackson missed at the end of the game. He should have had a much better week 1 stat line, but he still had a good stat line, double digits. So I like Zay Flowers. Again, you start Lamar no matter what. This is going to be a big day for Derrick Henry. I know some people kind of panicked on Henry in week 1. Don't worry about it. This is going to be one of those matchups where we are reminded why we drafted Derrick Henry. I don't think Justice Hill is going to be as involved in this game because the game script's not going to be there. And he's not, Chris Jones is not going to be in Lamar Jackson's face this whole game. But maybe Max Crosby will have something to say about that. We'll find out. But still, this is going to be a big day for Derrick Henry. I feel so confident in Derrick Henry. It's not even funny. Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, start both of them. The floor is with Andrews. The upside is with Likely. I will say I'm on the Isaiah Likely hype train. End of the season last year when he filled in for Andrews was great. Looked fantastic with the ball in his hands. The Ravens are trying to get him the football. Mark Andrews is going to be fine, but you just have to look at the pass catchers for the Ravens, right? It's Zay Flowers, then Andrews, then Likely, then Justice Hill. There's no other wide receiver on this team that puts any fear into opposing defenses. They will continue to get Likely the football. He's a player you can even consider flexing, but he's a strong start at the tight end position. And I'm not worried about Andrews. So, yeah, basically start all the Ravens. Raiders, you don't have many options. We'll move along. Here's one of the other matchups that I've got circled for the day. The Rams traveling to face the Cardinals. This is also a very fantasy relevant matchup. We have Puka Nacua headed to the IR, dealing with the knee injury, all that stuff. It's a mess, fantasy nightmare. Should have seen it coming. All the signs were there. Nonetheless, Puka's on IR. What does that mean for the rest of this offense? Well, Matthew Stafford should have a baller day. The Cardinals allowed the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks in week 1. Love Stafford this week. If you had to pick him up because of the Jordan Love issue, if you just had him on your roster because you went late round quarterback, if you're streaming him, whatever, Stafford's a very solid start this week. Kyren Williams should have a good day on the road here. The Cardinals were not bad against opposing running backs in week 1, but James Cook still had a double-digit fantasy performance. So I still like Kyren Williams. The work is there, the volume's there. You're still starting him. But the interesting thing here is looking at the wide receivers. Yes, you're starting Cooper Kupp. Went absolutely wild in week 1. Probably would have been still at a double-digit performance, even if Puka didn't get hurt in week 1, but had 32 fantasy points in week 1, right? So what does that mean for the rest of the Rams wide receivers? Well, we want to keep a close eye on Tyler Johnson. We want to keep a close eye on rookie Jordan Whittingham to see how they're involved in this game. And he's not on the screen, but Colby Parkinson at tight end is a really strong streaming option at the tight end position as well. So kind of see how everything unfolds. And we got Demarcus Robinson, who I think is a player you can and should consider flexing this week because the matchup is so solid against the Cardinals. So Robinson was a popular waiver wire pickup. Tyler Johnson got picked up in some leagues. Tyler Johnson might still be out there. The target and volume share was really close for the two in week 1. So I think you can definitely consider rolling out either guy, but for me, it's going to be Demarcus Robinson, who I really liked in the offseason as well, and drafted him here and there. Drafted a lot of him in Underdog for the reason that we could see an injury to Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua. So keep a close eye on this wide receivers room. It's going to be really interesting to watch and basically start just about everyone on the Rams offense. Moving to the Cardinals offense, we're basically starting everyone here as well. Kyler Murray, not the greatest week 1 performance, but you just got to roll him out there. The upside, the rushing upside is too high. He should have a better day against the Rams. Once again, I really like this game script here. James Conner, a solid week 1 fantasy performance. You are rolling him out with confidence in week 2. This Rams run defense was not up for the task in week 1. Marvin Harrison Jr., I know, disappointed in week 1. A lot of concern as the week has gone on. I was kind of high on him to start the week as like a great bounce back, week 2 performer, nice upside because I really like this matchup. I've moved back a little bit on that stance as the week has gone on, but I still think he's a very solid start and a guy that you just have to roll out again unless you're absolutely stacked at wide receiver. And then Trey McBride, pretty disappointing week 1, given where you drafted him, but another guy you just have to roll out. So basically we're starting everyone here. Got to watch this Rams wide receiver room and I guess Colby Parkinson as well. We'll see what happens with the first game with no Puka Nacua at all. Moving into this matchup in week 2. All right, next up we've got one of the most intriguing matchups in week 2. Fantasy football. That'll be the Bengals, who disappointed in week 1, traveling to face the Kansas City Chiefs. So some injuries here. Let's look at T. Higgins, who's doubtful. I don't think he's going to play. What does that mean for the rest of this offense, who, like I said, disappointed greatly in week 1? A lot of people are benching Joe Burrow. I don't mind benching Joe Burrow. If you have another option, maybe you got a guy like Jaden Daniels late. Maybe you picked up Baker Mayfield or Matthew Stafford. I'm okay if you're going to bench Burrow. But this Kansas City Chiefs defense, while they are a good defense, this game is an Arrowhead. They weren't great. I mean, they gave up a lot of fantasy points, but that's also because Lamar Jackson's so mobile and rushed for over 100 rushing yards. So if you're going to bench Burrow, that's okay. If you have to start him, I think it's okay as well. The Bengals are such a tough team to evaluate. I will say, tough game, bad game in week 1 against New England. Now they get Kansas City at Arrowhead. Then they have Washington at home. Then they're at Carolina. Then they have Baltimore at home. Then they're at the Giants. So in the next 5 weeks, we will get an idea, I believe, of what this Bengals team is going to truly look like. So I can understand benching Joe Burrow, but if you have to start him, okay. Jamar Chase, a strong start once again, even in a tough matchup. You have to start him. Now, Zach Moss, you might kind of look at and be like, I don't know. And I think Zach Moss is going to be one of these like RB2, fringe RB2 guys all year long. Not a high ceiling. You're hoping for a touchdown, but will probably get you double digits on a week in, week out basis. Just not a high ceiling there. Okay. If you own Chase Brown, I think he stays on the bench for now. Zach Moss was the lead running back, 9 rushing attempts, 4 targets in week 1. I'm okay with Zach Moss. I'm not crazy about him, but he's fine. Okay. Hollywood Brown is headed to IR for the Chiefs. He wasn't going to play in this game anyways. But this will be kind of interesting here because now we're going to get, exactly what this wide receiver room is going to look like. And we don't have any more, what happens when Hollywood Brown comes back? What is Xavier Worthy's, target volume going to look like once Hollywood Brown is back? We're not getting any of that. It's just this is what we have for the Kansas City Chiefs wide receivers. So, I guess it's not that interesting because we weren't really expecting Hollywood Brown to play this game. So you're starting everyone, Mahomes, Kelsey, Pacheco, or Rice. I'm not even going to talk about these guys. We just know we're starting them. And then I will say Xavier Worthy is interesting. I'll say this much, okay? 3 targets, 2 receptions, 47 receiving yards, a touchdown, 20 fantasy points, had the rushing touchdown as well. You drafted Xavier Worthy to be a boom or bust flex option. Just let him be either a benched player this week or a boom or bust bench option. He's going to be frustrating to own. He's going to be a player that goes off and then doesn't go off. This is the thing, right? He had the touchdown grab and he had the touchdown run. You take away 1 or 2 of those, is a very different stat line, and the volume is very low. But I still like Xavier Worthy because I like upside in the flex, so I still think he is definitely a flex-worthy player. Depends on who you're benching over him. This should be a good matchup. We'll see what it brings for fantasy here in week 2. All right, this will bring us to the Steelers traveling to face the Broncos. Russell Wilson is questionable for this matchup, which probably means that Justin Fields, I think, is going to play either way at the quarterback position. I think that's what the Steelers want. Either way, I just feel gross about this game. Najee Harris, I will say, he's probably your RB2, might be your RB3 or 4, depends on your build. Najee Harris, a really good start. This Broncos run defense is bad. It was bad last year. Najee Harris looks like the true workhorse running back for the Steelers. He looks good in this Arthur Smith system. He had 20 rushing attempts and 2 targets in week 1. Jaylen Warren had 2 rushing attempts, 2 targets. I like Najee a lot this week, and I'm not really a huge Najee Harris guy. George Pickens, regardless of who is at quarterback, I think is okay. Like, he's probably just have to start him. He might get the Pat Surtain treatment. Justin Fields might be a quarterback. So if you don't feel good about it, I think that's fine. But he kind of comes in as one of these players that just is going to end up in the flex. Like, the ceiling's still good. He has that big play capability. The floor is probably safe. The volume was, fantastic in week 1. So I think that's what it really boils down to. 7 targets, 6 receptions. For most teams, are like that's great volume. For the Steelers, it is because Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson both had 2 targets, and that was basically it. And then he had Pat Freiermuth at tight end with 4 targets. So yeah, for this team, it is good. Steelers defense, if you own them, don't even think about it. You are starting them. In terms of the Broncos, yeah, you can see on the screen. I mean, maybe Cortland Sutton in the right format, the right league, you could start. Even then, I think the Steelers defense is going to look really good again in week 2. Crossing my fingers for my guy, Bo Nix, but I'm basically don't have anything to talk about for the Broncos offense. If you own McLaughlin, you own Javonte Williams, you own Cortland Sutton, maybe you could start him, but for the most part, you're benching both those running backs, Greg Dulcich, Bo Nix, and everyone else in between. I know we had some interesting names at wide receiver kind of pop up in week 1 for the Broncos. Maybe some guys to watch like Josh Reynolds or Devon Bell, but we're going to watch him, and that's all we're going to do moving into week 2. All right, we have Sunday Night Football tonight between the Bears and the Texans. Okay, so sorry, I don't know why I did the intro like that, but key injuries for the Bears. We got Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, both questionable going into this game. Either way, I really like DJ Moore. Okay, Good matchup here. He still had 8 targets in week 1, 10 fantasy points, 5 receptions. Clear cut wide receiver 1 here. I think the game script will benefit DJ Moore. Whether Keenan Allen and or Roma Dunze play or not, I like DJ Moore. More volume if they're out. If they're not out, less defensive pressure for DJ Moore. Listen, I know people are looking at like Caleb Williams going in this matchup and they're like, I want to start the Texans defense or whatever. Texans defense going to play well. The Texans defense was bad week 1, okay? Yes, they won the game, or the Texans won the game. Defense didn't necessarily win the game, but the Colts did all kinds of stuff to that defense through the air, on the ground, and at the quarterback position. So I'm so comfortable with starting DJ Moore. I know he was kind of a disappointing week 1 player, but I'm okay with him. I'm worried about DeAndre Swift, and I'm a DeAndre Swift guy. I don't know what we're going to get out of wide receiver for the Bears. I don't like what we're getting at tight end between Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett. I don't want to start Caleb Williams right now. So basically, I'm starting DJ Moore, and we got 2 injuries to Keenan Allen and Roma Dunze, respectfully. In terms of the Texans, I'm basically rolling everyone out there. The Bears defense looked really good in week 1. That was against Will Levis, who looked awful. Okay. That was against a wide receiver room that's like, what do we really have here? This is CJ Stroud. This is Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Joe Mixon, who looked fantastic in week 1. This is a very different offense at home, their first home game of the year. Start all the Texans. I think Mixon could have another really big day. I think they're going to absolutely feed him. I think these wide receivers are going to ball out. Love CJ Stroud here in week 2. Not a lot to talk about. Let's move into our final matchup. All right, Monday Night Football, we got the Falcons traveling to face the Eagles. We got the battle of the Dirty Birds here. Everyone's going to be flapping around. Let's start with the Falcons. Bijan Robinson is a start. I don't care who he's going up against. You might look back to week 1 and think this was a little disappointing, but 16 fantasy points in the type of performance the Falcons had in week 1. I will take it. Drake London, on the other hand, you're probably looking at like, I am very concerned if I drafted Drake London. I do think the Falcons offense will play better as the year goes on. I'm not giving up on Captain Kirk O'Chains quite yet. I am concerned, don't get me wrong, but this is a great matchup. This Eagles secondary was not good last year, was not good in week 1. Maybe the front 7 can muster up enough and, against a Falcons offensive line that played poorly in week 1. But I think Drake London's going to have a good bounce back game in week 2. I'm okay with Drake London this week. Kyle Pitts scored a touchdown in week 1. What more can we get from Kyle Pitts? If you're a Kyle Pitts owner, you're happy, you're starting him. If you own Kirk Cousins, we're not going out of our way to start him, super flex, double quarterback league, stuff like that. Let's sit back and see what happens. This is a nice 3 games coming up here for the Falcons to get a good read on this team. Week 1 was tough, but now we're at Philly. Then we have the Chiefs at home, the Saints at home. It's a good little blend here. Let's sit back and see what happens with Kirk O'Chains. All right, A.J. Brown, late in the week, popped up with a hamstring injury, is questionable in this Monday night matchup. And this is the exact thing that we hate about fantasy football. This is a huge headache. 22 fantasy points in week 1. He's a must start every week. And this injury basically popped up like Friday, maybe happened Thursday, but we didn't hear about it till Friday. And this is going to mess up a lot of fantasy managers because we're probably not going to know if A.J. Brown is playing or not till Monday afternoon, Monday night, which basically means if you are thinking about starting A.J. Brown still, you're going to have to risk him potentially sitting out and picking up Jahan Dotson or Ray McLeod or Darnell Mooney last minute to start in place of an injured A.J. Brown, or A.J. Brown just plays and you start him because he's A.J. Brown, So I don't know where I really stand with this one. I'm going to leave it up to you guys. I would say for the most part, he's going to obviously be moved to your flex spot, and then you're going to have to make a really tough game time decision moving into Sunday's action. I would say if you have viable flex options, I would probably go ahead and start them just because his injury popped up so late in the week, and now the window is much shorter for A.J. Brown to be fully ready to go Monday night. Obviously, there's risk here. You're going to regret it if Brown does play and has a solid game, but it might just not be worth the worry and the headache and or the potential to start one of those guys I just listed who definitely don't have the same ceilings as A.J. Brown. In terms of the Eagles starters, we're just rolling everyone out here. Sorry, I had the wrong matchup for Devonta Smith. The Falcons allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers in week 1, not the 31st most. That was the Eagles defense, but correction, I fixed it, and Goddard is now yellow for his matchup. Sorry, it's late. Make fun of me in the comments. But yeah, Hurts, Barkley, Smith, Goddard. You just had to start these guys. I know Goddard's kind of a floor play, hoping for a touchdown, but if you drafted him, you probably got to roll him out there. Smith might see an increase in volume. That would be good, but even if he doesn't, it doesn't matter. It's still Devonta Smith, a very safe play. Barkley, don't worry about the matchup. Start him. Hurts, don't worry about the matchup. Start him. So it's going to be an interesting matchup. We'll see what happens with A.J. Brown. Let me know in the comments down below. Do you own A.J. Brown? Are you going to be okay? Are we going to be okay? We'll find out. That's all your matchups for week 2. That'll do it for today's video. If you guys have any fantasy football questions, drop them in the comment section down below. I will try to answer every single question before Sunday's action kicks off. Don't forget, we are running live fantasy Q&A streams here on the channel, and we'll be running one right before Sunday's action as well. And we have every single thing you need for week 2 fantasy football. Start sits at every position. Must start running backs, must start wide receivers, last minute waiver ads, buy low options. All the videos that you guys need will start popping up on the screen any moment here. Everything that you guys need for week 2 to dominate your opponent and walk away with a victory. And we'll be running it back for week 3 fantasy football and throughout the entire season. So you guys know what to do. Drop those comments. If you guys need anything, hit that subscribe button on the way out. If you guys did find the video helpful or enjoy the content, come join the Catch Fam community. And with that, I will say good luck in week 2 fantasy football, everyone. And thank you so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on the Catch.